Welcome to the Mike and Doug Show. I'm Doug. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Doug. How are you?
Well, good. You're laughing because you just watched a video of Mark of the Zucker Beast saying that he believes in God, which is truly a laughable matter. But today, because demon possession, exorcisms are in the news practically every single day, we are going to address that as in this particular type of podcast that we do. And you have connected it to some of your research with those um, incredulous Babylonians and their many, many demon gods.
Yes.
So today, I can't wait to see what it is you're going to bring because you know I get all worked up when you start talking about these things.
Well, I'm not sure what I'm going to bring, but I'm going to frame it for us. What we're discovering is that the Babylonian bankers of ancient times figured out how to do usury really well, and related to that slavery and turn this off. Slavery and any kind of abuse of humanity, they learned how to do really well. And once they learned how to use money to achieve their objectives, they essentially took over commerce throughout the world and have never let go of it. And so, what we have been discovering as we've marched through these millennia in looking at how they did it, what they called themselves, and how consistent they were in this plying of usury. What we started putting together is the current story, and what we have discovered, and we are putting together a package of investigation material that will be published shortly. But we have discovered that the city of London is the center of this demon that's attacking our world. And the city of London, at one point in the mid 1800s, a a man who Benjamin Disraeli actually called London a new Babylon, and then he became prime minister for 2 terms after that. So here we have even the British themselves couldn't keep this secret completely. And so what we're now doing is unpacking that. And then we've discovered that since the very formation of the city of London, it has been under the control of these Babylonian bankers who marched west and began taking over the empires of Europe. And here we are today, suffering from 1,200 years of the work of the Babylonian Radhanite bankers, merchant bankers of the world, in taking control of our world. And so, what we're suffering from now is the continuing effort of these Babylonians to control us. But now we're looking at how their religion actually wants to extinguish God. And in doing that, they're going to they want to extinguish God's creation, that we are made in the image and likeness of God. And so it's now become life or death. It's not just about business. It's not just about money. It's not just about us doing some bad things here or there. It's okay. Nobody's perfect. What we are fighting are demons who really want to wipe us out. And so what we have been looking at is more of the details of the nature of these demons that emerged out of Babylon. And it's amazing how many there were. I mean, we're making a list of just the demons that have been talked about within Scripture, and we're up to 60. And these are scriptures I've read during my life. And when I encounter these names of these demons, in my mind, these were demons that were far off 4,000 years ago in Babylon and probably didn't have that much relation to me today. I couldn't have been more wrong. What we are seeing is now we are seeing these demons come out of the woodwork, and these demons have been very successful at hiding themselves. And you're going to tell us why that is. And so what we're seeing is behavior now that we've never seen. We're seeing open homosexuality, open pedophilia, open transvestite activity in our public libraries and with our young children. We're seeing every form of sinful behavior that used to be sort of under the covers, now completely out in the open. And so, what are we looking at? We're seeing wars, we're seeing rumors of wars. And what I'd like to do is discuss with you, since you were recruited to be one of the Vatican's top exorcists for the entire world. I know you didn't take that job, but they recruited you for it. You can help us understand more of this world, because as I'm trying to grow in my Christian faith, what I realize is I am trying to throw off a lifetime of materialism that has been pushed on me and my family and my community. And that materialism fogs an awareness of this demonic world. And we've got to become very aware of it. And that's what we're working on right now.
I'd call them merchants with a sword. Oh, that's a familiar phrase I use all the time to describe the British East India Company, but it really started in Babylon with really the supposed Hebrews who were taken into captivity. They took over for the Sogdians on the Silk Road, and basically they made sure that there was always, just like Kissinger has, there's a clash of nations, but the people who are the merchants, they don't pick up the sword. They use other people, and they use slaves, and they use mercenaries to carry out these wishes. So really think of it. In the big bankers, can you think of a big banker family who sent their children to war? No, they created the war on both sides. They funded it on both sides. It's like Prescott Bush and the Union Bank. He funded both sides. Hitler, he funded Britain and he funded America, and he made a great profit. And in the end, they had to close down his bank. And then we get two of his progeny, two of his descent, inhabiting the White House. This is merchandising. This is merchants with a sword, and these are killers. Now, you mentioned Babylon and all these demons. Let me explain a little bit about that. I've just wrote up an article last night. I didn't really know exactly what you were doing, but I thought, what needs to happen here is just a little introduction to a few small phrases of what Rudolf Steiner describes as the demonic activity or these demons, and why they're able to move into our lives even when we are unwittingly allowing them to, when we are unconsciously participating in the hold of these demons on people. But let's just go back to Babylon and dwell on that. Yes, I loved your list, and a lot of those are only ones that I've seen in my comparative religion studies, which was a long, long time ago when I got a PhD in comparative religions. So some of those I know, some I don't, but I can definitely talk to the ones that we have been addressing here now for a couple years. When the Hebrews were taken into the first and second captivity in Neo-Babylon, which was after the Assyrian captivity, so they usually say there's two, but there's actually three. That second and the third one, well, more than likely, they were already there. King Solomon's gold, we've demonstrated, had to have gone somewhere since it wasn't in the temple and it wasn't used for coins. Where did all that gold go? And you're talking tons and tons of gold. Well, it went to Babylon. And what was it used for? The assets to back up what are literally modern day banking rules and regulations and basically Ponzi schemes. So they deprecated everything they touched. They turned it to evil. As a matter of fact, the Babylonians who worshiped these demons said that the Hebrews or the Radonites in Babylon were the worst. They were the abomination of desolation. They went to the Ishtar temples, which were based upon understanding the mysteries of birth, and they turned them into whorehouses. And that's the reason the phrase, the whore of Babylon. That is referring to the Babylonian Radonites, the Hebrews, supposedly Hebrews, which, of course, the Hebrew was bred right out of them in the first captivity in Assyria. So that's the reason that we call them fake Jews or Radonite Jews or Radonite Babylonians, because they absorbed every culture that they came near. They infiltrated it. And injunction given to Abraham to have one God, they never followed. And the reason
Right.
you see so many demonic names in the Old Testament is because the Hebrews went back to worshiping all these demons and they stopped
Go-
going for the one God.
I think we have a clear example of that in Solomon, and this is thoroughly documented in the Bible. That at some point Solomon stopped following God, and it was after he received all this gold from the mines of Ophir that were brought to him by the king of Tyre, who was a pagan. And what we learn is that in the process of Solomon using this gold, he married 700 women and he took on 300 concubines. And the Bible says very clearly that Solomon forsook God and he started building temples to all the religions of all of his wives. And those were all Babylonian um, uh, gods and demons that he was building temples to. So the lure of the money and the no doubt deal that he did between Nineveh and Babylon and Jerusalem led not only him but all of Israel astray. And so when we talk about what the children of Israel, specifically the tribe of Judah, started doing in Babylon, we are looking at the forsaking of the Hebrew religion, the God of Israel, and the assumption of the demonic religions of Babylon. And those have come down to us today. And I won't get into that right now, but you're talking about Rodanites. That Rodan was an area of Babylon, which was the end of the Silk Road, where all these merchant bankers collected all their fees and taxes and income from the Silk Road. And so the fact that the Hebrew religion got subsumed by merchant banking is very clear. And so what we see today is a lot of confusion about who's Jewish, who's not. We see all these names, made up names about Jews that come from different countries, when in fact that's not about their blood. It's about where they came from. And what we now see is that the great lie, and this was a British Jewish knight in England in about 1940, said this is likely the biggest hoax of history, is what we're talking about right now. And what we have discovered in that hoax, and I'm going to bottom line it, is these Babylonian bankers, after the Arabs kicked them out of Babylon about 10 in the 1050 time frame, just before the Crusade started, was a very key time when these fake Jews, they were Babylonian, they were religiously dedicated to these demons that we're talking about from Babylon. They renamed themselves Ashkenazi. They were already in Europe. So we're not talking about moving anywhere. They already managed the whole trading route all the way to England and even on to Iceland. And they'd been doing that. They were experts at that. And so what they did is they had to rebrand themselves, because these Babylonians were pagans. They were worshiping God. They were worshiping idols. They were sacrificing children. They were throwing people into slavery, and they were charging interest to the point where when their loans became too onerous for the people that they had loaned the money to, they needed an excuse to basically undo those deals. And what did they do? They renamed themselves Ashkenazi. They continued to pretend to be Jewish, and they made up anti-Semitism as a way to protect themselves. And they created a story called pogroms that as the reason they had to move around. And we now see it was to get out of all these banking deals they had done that had lived their life and needed to die. And the way they did it is they made up a story about persecution, even for getting out of their own loans. So we're talking about very evil people. They're not Jewish at all. and they are in fact Babylonians. And now what we're seeing in looking at these religions, we're seeing all this worship of every kind of sin you can think of, and now we're seeing all those demons coming out of the woodwork all over our country right now, and they are being run by this evil government that we've got, which is under the thumb of the City of London. And this is, I think, a key thing for what we need to talk about. People need to realize whenever you start blaming the CIA or the FBI or the NSA or the State Department or Department of Defense or DARPA, you're misdirecting. You don't understand what's going on here. What's going on in here is the British, out of the City of London, are using our institutions, our three-letter institutions, to ply this Babylonian Radhanite trade throughout the world, this banker merchant activity throughout the world, and our institutions are nothing but their tools. So until we start talking about MI6, MI5, the Foreign Office, GCHQ, the City of London, the Bank of England, the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, the banker families of Europe, we're never going to get anywhere in solving our problem. Sorry,
Absolutely
I'm kind of
right.
preaching.
No, that was good preaching. I liked it. Plus, it summarizes so much of our work over the past few years. Well, monotheism of Abraham, okay, what did that really do? It told a Chaldean, Abraham, to leave Chaldea, go to a land that wasn't his, and take it by force. And with a pogrom, with wiping out the people who were there. And this is why the Assyrians learned from the Hebrews early on that if you wanted to conquer your enemy, you had to breed them out of existence. And so when they were in the first captivity, the Assyrian kings had a rule. Any Hebrew could not marry another Hebrew. They had to marry some other race. And they basically annihilated the 10 of the tribes. So when there was told the lie that there was a diaspora, there was no diaspora. The 10 tribes were taken into Assyria, and they were bred out of existence. Even the Levites, they went down into southern Israel, and the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah were there, and they took the Levites and they took them away so they could not do their practices. The way I look at this is very simple. As you said, the descendants of Abraham, for instance, Solomon and David, they claim to go back in their blood lineage to Abraham, but really what are they doing? They're not the ones doing the religious services, are they? Those are the Levites. And so even in their time, the Levites were an elite caste that you had to pay a tax to because they didn't work. They made everybody else go out and work, and then they charged taxes to every single person that was supposedly a Hebrew, a Jew, and they had to come to the temple once a year, and they had to pay in coinage. And then what did these later Pharisees and Sadducees do? They traded the coin of all the different Semitic groups that Moses had basically warred against, who believed in all kinds of different gods and demons. And they said, well, your coinage isn't good enough for the temple. You have to trade it for ours. And basically that was a tax upon a tax. Does that sound familiar? And then they became the bank. They were the ones who held the coins. But what did Solomon have? He had more gold than he knew what to do with. So where did the gold go? We believe it went to Babylon and was used as assets.
I don't think the Hebrews ever really controlled their banking. I think it was influenced and likely controlled from Babylon and Assyria way back to their beginnings, because you don't ever see a lot of discussion in the Bible about economic issues, but you do see a lot of writing in the Babylonian writings about how to handle contracts and loan money. And I think that they just copied whatever the Babylonians did. And then when Solomon got all his gold, he gave it to the Babylonians because he knew they were the ones that could handle it. They had been managing the whole Silk Road for the entire world for over a millennia.
Absolutely. When Moses and his gang took over the Canaanites and all of the surrounding Semitic groups, There was no reference to banking. There was no
Right.
reference to any of that. There was no reference to what they did with the gold or anything like that. There's no proof there was ever any gold. There's no proof there was ever the Ark of the Covenant, except for basically the stories told in the Old Testament. But Abraham was basically an elitist who was certainly a person who wished to get involved in commerce, but he did it with a sword. Well, the same thing would be true with the Sogdians. The Sogdians controlled the Silk Road, and they had soldiers all along it to
Now,
protect the
can
people.
just to help people, where the Sogdians were, they were north of Persia on the way to China. So it's that whole area of the stands that we call them today, Turkestan, Kurdistan. That was anciently called Sogdia. It had a different name, and so that was the group that you're talking about.
They were right next to the kingdom of Bactria. And as a matter of fact, they in Samarkand, they had basically the most marvelous city of their time. It was the center of the Silk Road. It was the center of commerce, the center of merchandising. It was the center of basically East meeting West, or
Hmm.
not quite West, but the west of the Silk Road. And so what you have there in Babylon, I think, is Abraham simply looked at what the Babylonians were doing and said, "Oh, I want this, but I'm not going to participate with them. I'm going to go off and start my own God, who I'm going to say spoke to me in a whisper that promised me the land of Canaan, the land of milk and honey, which it was called later, and that my descendants would be as many as the stars in the sky, and that they would rule the world." Well, right now, a pure hearted person, if you ask them, are the Rothschilds good or evil? And then if they know anything about the Rothschilds, they're going to probably say they're Satanists, they're pedophiles, and they believe in sacrificing babies and humans for the blood. Well, all that is true. And it's been true for 2,000 years or so, 4,000 years, excuse me. But they don't necessarily have the proof that you have demonstrated and can be found on your site, Americans for Innovation, and our site, Aim for Truth. So, what are we saying here? We're saying that Abraham would have been a person who said, I don't want to believe in all these demons. Now, the way that it works is in the past, anything that was unseen was either called a demon or a deus. It was either a god or a demon, and it was unseen. So if there was anything created that was unseen, that had unseen influences upon the material plane, it was usually attributed to, like the Greeks had a god, but they also had Hephaestus, who made the lightning bolts, and he was in the underworld. They had Pluto in the underworld. They had the negative sides of Neptune. They had the negative sides of most of the gods and goddesses, had a threefold nature, a nature of birth, of death, and of rebirth. And no matter who you look at in the Greek pantheon, they had multiple names and they had multiple manifestations. So that's what we're talking about. When you start to worship the unseen world because of the forces coming into the material plane, you start to attribute it with names. Well, in the Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia, or what's called the Levant in some cases if it goes west, what do you have? You have, first off, the Akkadians, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and a whole group of people who went through a succession of different rulerships at different times. And they would take, for instance, if we go back to ancient Akkad, Akkadians, they worshipped a being called Inanna, and they worshipped the person, the shepherd boy. And it's very coincidental that much of Christianity seems to align with the solar figures, the solar heroes of these basically pagan religions. And when we say pagan, let's remember, in my opinion, a pagan is one who doesn't really believe in Christianity and maybe not God. And they believe in what? They believe in these, what we would call made up myths or made up pantheons of gods. So when they're talking about Inanna, at first Inanna is a good person and she worshiped Tiamat, and Tiamat was the great mother. But later, Inanna was turned into an evil being and Tiamat was turned into the dragon. And so there was a being, her son came along, who was named Marduk, who conquered Tiamat. And for Inanna, she had to go into hell, just like Persephone did, because it's part of the initiation process. If you wish to understand the unseen forces, you can either go into heaven or you can go into hell, the underworld. And so Dumuzi, who's later Tammuz, the name Tammuz, which is a god at one point, a demon at another point, went into hell and rescued Inanna from Erishkigal, who had hung Inanna on a hook through her heart in the underworld. And Dumuzi, the shepherd, went down, took her off the hook, and brought her to the surface. But he made a deal with Erishkigal, who we could call Pluto for the Greeks, this underworld god, and said, okay, if you let Inanna come up, I will come down into hell, into the underworld, for half the year. Same as Persephone. So we see these myths again and again and again being explanations for how the solar forces wax at one point and wane at another point. And if the solar forces are kind, you have a good harvest. And if they're not, you need to sacrifice some being, whether it be a god or a demon, for the sake of the harvest being good. And since they related that regeneration of the natural world each year, this had to do with the solar mysteries or solar gods. Well, later, Inanna became Ishtar. And instead of having Dumuzi save her, basically, if you're a Chaldean, you believed that she was saved by Gilgamesh, who was half man. Well, the percentages go different ways, but half man, half god. And what did he do? He went out into the wild and he tamed a demon named Enkidu, who has a variety of names. But he wrestled with him, and this Enkidu had horns, hair all over his body, and the tail of an animal. And Gilgamesh was basically a solar hero, a god in a human body, and he wrestled with him. But how did he actually conquer him? He took him to the temple of Ishtar, and Ishtar seduced him. And so you can start to see, oh my goodness, the mysteries of birth are now being turned into the oldest institution on the earth, prostitution. And so that's the god.
Was in Babylon.
Yes. And that is the god that we would call Ammonius or Ammodius, which means the opposite of God. And so when the Hebrews got there, they were basically called derogatory names like Jews or Judah. And they said that they were the abomination of desolation. In other words, they didn't believe or practice what they preached. And then they rewrote the books of the Chaldeans and called it the books of Moses. And then they rewrote all of that when they started banking and taking over for the Sogdians and becoming merchants with a sword. And they named it the Talmud. But you have 3 different forms of the Talmud and multiple ways of expressing those teachings. What really happened was the rabbis, which there should have been no rabbis because the Levites were bred out of existence and they were the elitists who literally collected the tax for the temple. But if the Levites were bred out of existence, then who was it that came to power? It would have been the rabbis, the banking families, the people who wrote the Talmud. And what did the Talmud say? It said usury is good. It said the laws of the Babylonian laws from ancient Babylon of Hammurabi literally created the fact that Hebrew fake Jews, Babylonian Radhanites, created economic slavery by following the Hammurabi laws to put people in jail and before owing a debt that was accumulated by usury. Well, what happened to them when they were in debtor's prison? They died. They worked them to death. And then if they hadn't paid off the debt, which they couldn't because they only made a tiny bit of money when you're in debtor's prison, then they took their children and they worked them as slaves. And then if they died, they took the wife and the female children. So the sins of the father were foisted upon the sons and daughters, all because of Babylonian Radhanites becoming merchants with the sword that for money they're willing to kill.
And one of the things that what you're talking about is described in ancient cuneiform tablets. And this is an interesting aspect of this because it appears in the 1800s that the British East India Company tried mightily to destroy all this evidence of their connection with the Babylonian Radhanites. And they, in fact, there was a great disaster where they had collected something like 60 or 70 tons of antiquities, and then they all sunk in the Tigris River. Um, and these were cuneiform tablets that described business contracts. And what we now can see from contracts that go back to 600 BC, which is only like 300 years from Solomon, as we see these fake Jews already running Babylon, and they very carefully preserved their contracts in these clay tablets. So they would have these contracts, they're about the size of a hand, and they would put all the cuneiform uh, uh, aspects of the deal right on the cuneiform tablet. And then we'd actually have people sign these with their fingernails. And then they would carefully let it dry, and then they would put it in these big clay archive uh, pots, basically. And so what they discovered in the mid 1800s, after this big disaster, is they discovered more of these contracts. And so what we're seeing here is that these bankers were so clear about their dynasties back 600 years before Christ that they carefully preserved these contracts so that they could pass this ownership from father to son to grandfather, down the generations. And they were already practicing what we have today with compound interest. And they were controlling everything about the commercial activity of the known world back 600 years before Christ. And now we're seeing just 300 years earlier, King Solomon's gold no doubt came to Babylon, and that was part of the equity that they used in how they maintained their control and do to this day. I think they learned how to use gold to create fiat currency and debt 4,000, more than 4,000 years ago. And their descendants are still doing that today. And what became fascinating to us is that they were called Radhanites by an Arab geographer who was also the chief spy of Babylon and also the manager of the post office for Babylon in 800 AD. And he called them Radhanites, and it was well known that these people lived in these posh areas of Babylon that were at the end of the Silk Road where they collected all their cash. And those Radhanites then started getting worried that the Seljuk Turks were going to mess up this business that they had had for 1.5, 1.5 millennia. And these Radhanites had a very extensive trade network all over the known world at the time. And so once they moved out of Babylon and were pushed out of Babylon, they just reestablished all of their other centers around Europe with this control of banking. And what we just discovered is that when the City of London was formed in 1067, that was William the Conqueror, who came from France. He was French. So he obviously had a lot of contact with these Babylonian Radhanites, these fake Jew bankers. And he brought them to London. And one of his first acts was to establish the City of London, where they would set up this, what is now called the Square Mile, way back at the founding of England. And he let these Radhanites take over control of England in his newly formed empire. And then within 10 years, he ordered a book to be created where he did a complete inventory of all the property and all the holdings and all the agriculture of England. And it's the first key book of the English Empire. It's called the Doomsday Book. And in that book, wouldn't you know it, they even define rad knights in that book. And these were the people that were working with the barons and the king to control the economy and the commerce of England, France, Belgium, Germany, Scandinavia. The Rad Knights, they didn't even change the name, Douglas. They were already. I'm sure the translation of that Arab geographer had circulated in England, and they didn't even change the name, Rod Knight to Rad Knight. Rad Knights, or they called them riding knights, and these were the people that rode with the king or with the barons and handle all their business, including all their commerce. And then the literally within about 50 years, according to these fake historians that we have discovered, the term Rad Knight disappeared from all the books. And what did stay were knights. So they had two types of knights. They had the riding knights that went with the barons and handled all their money, and then they had just knights. And those knights were created out of this system. And those were the fighting men who protected the kingdoms, the property of the kingdoms. So what we now see from this early pattern that was created in the City of London is why the City of London and the merchant bankers of the world have to run our armies. And so now what we see is that the City of London is running our Navy, is running our Army, is running our DARPA, Department of Defense, and we are the property protectors for the bankers in the City of London and their minions in New York and Washington. I mean, it's amazing. Nothing's changed.
There's nothing new under the sun. Human nature is easily predictable. And so it's still going on to this very day. And those Rad Knights, the two that usually traveled together, one was collecting the taxes to pay the standing army, and the other one was part of the standing army. Well, this is the same thing going on in Babylon. The monarchy had to have a standing army, so they had taxes. Who collected the taxes? The Babylonian Radonites, the fake Jews. They didn't go to war. They were exempt from taxes. As a matter of fact, the Rad Knights in England were exempt from taxes, but they were the tax collectors. And they were collecting to do what? To kill people. Blood. These are blood sacrifices.
Right. Protect the property. And sometimes you had to kill people to protect your property. It's always been about property.
So in my opinion, these cuneiform agreements, these little tablets of clay, are the same thing that we get in all of the fairy tales, that you sign a deal with the devil in blood. Mm-hmm. When you signed for an Ajibi or a Marushu banker in a cuneiform document, if you didn't pay, you were going to pay in blood.
Right.
And what was it? What were you paying the taxes for? To have a standing army so that you could protect the king because of his wealth that was being collected by the Silk Road merchants, first the Sogdians and then later the Babylonian Radonites, which continues to this very day. Right. Our taxes go to pay the Federal Reserve. As a matter of fact, all of the money made in America that we have as our GDP can't pay off the tax debt. It's an onerous debt. It's a debt that cannot ever be paid because it is compiling the usuric interest rate so that you can never pay it. It was set up that way.
It's intentional.
So these are blood contracts. And basically, then let's remember that Abraham, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, what was Abraham told to do by God? Sacrifice his son. And his blade was coming down on his son when God's hand stopped his hand. God was finding out if Abraham was still part of the blood mysteries for the sake of power and domination of other countries. In other words, Abraham was a warlord. Let's call him what he was. So was Moses.
Well, he was Babylonian. He was from the area
Chaldea.
of Ur. Yeah. Chaldea, yeah.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing here are literally what we feel in today's world. What happens when you don't pay your taxes? They take your house, okay? Because you have to you never own your property in America because we have life, liberty, but we don't. We have the pursuit of happiness, not property. If we had property, we could say to the federal government, "You can't keep taxing me for what I own. I own the land. I paid for it. I shouldn't have to pay for it every year. And if I have a bad year, I can go to jail. And while I'm in jail,
So
I'll lose everything."
here's what a deal. These same officials, they borrow money freely, which they don't pay tax on, and they take our money in tax in addition to that. So what do they do with what do they do? All they're doing is they're fleecing every aspect of human creativity, and I think that's really the key here, and why we're looking at demons, because they're fleecing our God-given ability to create and then to own property, which they're also fleecing, and we're letting them do it. So I think that what we've got to do is figure out what we're going to do about this. And as you have said, and I'd like you to get into this. So we have all these demons, which we can now name demons like Mammon, like Satan, like Lucifer, Lilith, Asmodeus, Mammon. So we have specific demons who have anciently plied their trade in human beings. Now, one of the things you said the other day when we were talking about talking is you said that the demons are here and they have a purpose. And that purpose is to show people how to stop sinning and start living righteously. Can you say more about that? Because I think that is really key here. Why do we have so many demons roaming around right now?
Because people wish to follow in their footsteps. They try to emulate the people in power and control. But the people in power and control, like the Rothschilds, one of their greatest sins is sloth. They don't do any work. They simply are vampires. And so people say, well, good heavens, look, the being of Leviathan interests me, the being of envy, and I want to be like them. And since they worship money, mammon, I will worship money. And then perhaps I, in their Luciferic delusion, will become as powerful as these bankers that have basically controlled the economic sphere for 4,000 years. And what is the economic sphere? It is the human willpower. It's the work that you do. It's all about work. This can, by Nikola Tesla, calculated as horsepower. Rudolf Steiner said it was horsepower. When you have power, when you create a demon in a machine that does your work for you, you then turn towards sloth. So what you can do is not use the machines unless you have to, and then use them for good purposes. But all machines from the original pumps that were used for irrigation in Mesopotamia, from the devices they used to build temples, the devices they used to build the Tower of Babylon. All of these things are filled with demons, according to Rudolf Steiner, and you'll find that again in the article below this. And so let's just take, for instance, Marduk. Marduk, they thought, well, I'm going to worship Marduk because he conquered the devil. He conquered the dragon, Tiamat.
Marduk is the god of the demon of war, right?
Well, he changed. At first, he was a solar deity, and then later he became Bel Marduk. Bel, B-E-L, is the name of Satan. Same name as Baphomet. Same name as Beelzebub. Same name as Baal. Same name as Mephistopheles. But they just get different names at different times. And so really they said, look at this. We're worshiping the unseen because we want the forces coming out of the unseen world. Well, innovation is something that came out of human creativity from the unseen world. And so what did they do? They, of course, basically hijacked all innovation and turned it to something to give this sloth, this gluttonous king, this monarch who claimed to be in direct contact with the unseen world. And so therefore, they built temples all over the place, named these previous gods, and said that they had control of them. Later, when other people said, well, look at what came of that, we're now going to take those gods and turn them into demons because they had demonic reactions by the people who worship them.
Mhm.
And so look what the Romans did. The Romans said, oh no, these pathetic Greeks worship all these gods and they're stupid. So we're basically going to take them, rename them, build temples to them, and try to control them in Rome. So for every god there was in Greece, there was a temple in Rome where they deprecated what was a sacred reaction between the seen and the unseen, and turned it into Caesars becoming gods themselves, so that Julius Caesar was considered a god. That is the abomination of desolation. That is the worst thing you can do. In the Bible, it says the worst sin is to call a person a fool. But you see, because people don't understand the Bible, they don't know what that means. So they call a jester a fool. They call anybody being silly a fool. No, a fool means someone who has no association with God, that they deny God. That's a fool. That's the abomination of desolation. And that's what was happening in these temples that were at first supposedly they're built to give credence to an association with the unseen gods. Later, they became temples of the worst types of degradation of mankind. So the temple of Ishtar became a whorehouse.
Okay, so we've built all these temples in modern America, and it appears they're all they have the same purpose, and that is to preserve this the demon of Mammon's hold on economy, on commerce, and enslavement of humanity into debt. It seems like that's the main purpose of our institutions, and so what we see is a lot of demons associated with making sure that happens. And one of the things that seems obvious today is the amount of lying has gone off the charts, and so one of the things you and I were talking about is when somebody lies, and you as somebody who was kind of sensitive to being able to see those things in your earlier career, when somebody lies, are they allowing a demon to enter their lives?
Yes. Every time you commit a sin, in other words, every time you worship the 7 deadly sins, which are, of course, vices, instead of worshiping virtue, heavenly virtue, you worship physical, material vices. It's for your own self-aggrandizement. And that's and so, yes, you are in fact allowing demons. And every time you use a machine and you can't appreciate all of the human effort that went into that machine being available for you to use, and you are so luciferically prideful, you think that you deserve it, that is definitely what I say is your daily activity, and whatever your daily activity is, your worship, and that's your religion. Now let's take the Catholic Church. When you're a priest, they said you need to take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. What does that mean? Poverty so that you don't worship mammon. But then what do the priests do? Because of that, and they don't have to make money, they just have to do their services and take care of their parish. What happens to them? They become extraordinarily lazy. They become fat. They stop thinking. And they specifically stop thinking because of the vow of obedience. They have no freedom. When any priest in the Catholic Church must do whatever they are told to do, they must go wherever they must go. They don't get to have an opinion. They have no free will. They're not supposed to have any money, and that's so. If their free will is taken away, then they can't be luciferic now, can they? So they had good intents by copying the practices of the priests and priestesses in pagan religions, but it went awry. And then chastity? Are you kidding? You can't get anyone who's committing bigger sins than Catholic priests. We have seen, 60,000 cases brought to trial, and they had to pay $4.5 billion to take those trials out of the court because of priests molesting children, boys, girls, women, men, it doesn't matter. It isn't that they're just pedophiles. It's not that they're just homosexuals. These are sexually perverted people. So they say, well, you can't get married. Well, in the Eastern Church, like for yourself, that you're involved in, they can get married. As a matter of fact, they like them to be married and to be a rabbi in the old days. And that's the reason they say Jesus married Mary Magdalene, who was not the whore that was described. She was the niece of Joseph of Arimathea, the decurion who was in charge of the shipping of tin from Britain to Israel. He was one of the richest men at the time. And so his niece, Mary Magdalene, they say, married Christ. Why? Because to be a rabbi, you had to be married. Period. Why? Because they knew that if you were married and you were honest and loyal, then you would hopefully not be so tempted by Asmodeus, which is the being of lust, the being that can't get enough sex with anything. And then the being of poverty, if it dwelt in you, you then learned what human industry is really about, what economy is really about, that your willpower needs to go into doing nothing but selflessly servicing the needs of your parish. And obedience, well, that goes back to the myth of the divine right of kings, that supposedly kings and monarchies have a direct connection to the spiritual world, which they don't. Look in history, they're the most vile people who ever existed were the monarchs. And they basically oftentimes bankrupted their own country, like Louis XIV bankrupted France. And that's the reason that Louis XVI got beheaded along with Marie Antoinette. And what did he do? It was building Versailles.
Okay, so I'm trying to follow where you're going with this, because we got off into the Catholic Church, and I'm not an expert in the Catholic Church, and I'm not sure I share your view on Mary Magdalene, but the point.
Oh, I don't agree with that, by the way.
Okay.
I'm saying other people say that.
Okay, so what is the point you're trying to make about what we were just talking about?
That any religion subsumes the previous one. They change the names, they manipulate it for their own good, and it becomes more materialistic. It becomes what was spiritual becomes spiritual materialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems a wonderful thing, poverty, chastity, and obedience. Oh, yes, that's what I want for my priest.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
No, right. It isn't. It's the opposite of what you want.
Well, yeah. Any kind of tyrannical system is going to require certain kinds of obedience from their minions, and I think that's been with humanity since day one. But in terms, I mean, so there aren't any group has a natural leadership structure that develops in order to have an organization and move along. But I think what we're talking about here, if we could stay with merchant banking, because I think that's really the point of what we're trying to say here relative to Babylon, that what we have seen is a complete implementation of the Babylonian demonic forces within merchant banking, which has been with us for many millennia, probably 4 or 5 millennia. And so if we're going to overcome these forces that are harassing us now, we've got to identify that. And then I'm not sure you really got to my question to you about St. Paul was asked once why there's so many factions within the church. And his comment was similar to what you have said, in that, well, there have to be factions in order to prove that which is good. And so if that's the case relative to the demonic activity today, what is it we're supposed to be learning out of these forces that are attacking us right now? How can we make this a positive thing?
You can use the demonic forces for good purposes. And there can be good people who literally are standing on unconsecrated ground. So in a church, the best people in the church are usually the pious ones who have no power or authority, and the worst ones in a church are often the authorities. So what I'm basically saying is evil is there to wake up good. If
Okay, I think that's what I think that I was picking up from what you were saying. That this isn't just I can do this. This is the purpose of God allowing these demons to have sway right now. And is there some sort of proportion here? Are we having this massive problem because our materialism has gotten so bad that we have very few tools to use against that, and we've got to learn. We've got to learn to become more spiritual beings in order to fight this. And if we don't, we will lose to it. Is that the
absolutely,
conclusion?
that is correct in my opinion. And basically, the problem is, in my opinion, also, 2/3 of humanity has already sold out to trying to follow, emulate the idols that they have. And these idols are rich bankers, billionaires.
Right.
Oh, these wonderful Silicon Valley
Yeah.
geniuses. Oh, we want to be just like them. And it's okay. It must be okay because more than the majority of people on the earth follow
Are
those paths.
chasing
I,
it.
I, I was once
Right.
told divorce is completely okay because 51% of American families get divorced. So it has to be okay.
Mm.
No, it does not. Look at Sodom and Gomorrah. How many were the remnant that were saved? Look at Noah. What was the remnant that was saved? A very small group. So
Well,
there was a
I had a friend who loved the phrase, "Well, McKibben, if you were successful, you'd be rich." And so there is this one-to-one correlation in our culture, in our success culture, that says if you're not rich, you're not successful. And of course, that's antithesis to the message of Christ. And I don't share that. And my feeling is, okay, my job is not to be successful. My job is to be faithful. And even if in the process of being faithful, there are certain resources that come to me to steward, then fine, I'll deal with it that way. So in that way, I can have hopefully a more healthy approach to funds and money, in that it's going to be God's will, whether I have it or whether I don't. I am not going to go chasing the money. And that has been a difficult thing um, uh, to learn, because everything about the culture is pushing you to make money.
blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will inherit the earth. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that you don't have money. It means that you're humble enough to appreciate what you have and you don't envy what you don't have and you don't
Right.
try to covet
Yeah.
other
I don't need
people's.
to have that guy's money.
Exactly. Now, when I was young, I was first considered to be, well, I was a special education student. And, my brothers all thought they'd call me stupid. And then I took a bunch of tests and they figured out that, in fact, I was rather smart. And so they would always say to me, if you're so smart, how come you ain't rich?
Oh, really?
This is the gospel of American
Right.
capitalism.
Correct.
If you're so smart, how come you ain't rich?
And that's the demon of mammon. And I think
Absolutely.
that's where what we've got to do is stop just talking about those in general and realize we have a demon attacking our culture. We have a demon attacking our churches, our businesses, our enterprise, our relationships, our social structure. These demons are looking to tear us apart. And that's really what's interesting about looking at all these Babylonian demons, because if you look at them as a group, they are quite successful currently in attacking in every angle in way they can. And I think that's got us back on our heels. And I'll give you one example. I sent you that video. Somebody just found Zuckerberg trying to talk about God, and they were sincerely asking, "Do you think he's sincere?" And here I want to ask you a question. I've always seen the Christian ethos, the turn the other cheek, the um, uh, forgiveness, and these very sensitive characteristics are difficult to uh, deal with when you're dealing with somebody who's just chasing the dollar and is trying to push a different ethic on you. And so if somebody lies to me, my Christian approach is going to be, okay, they've lied. I'm going to see if they lie again. And if they do, then I'm going to deal with it then. But the problem is in business, sometimes by the time you find out they're lying, they've already taken you, and you're late. You're late to the game, and you lose that particular activity. With these demons, do we have a requirement to take the behavior of somebody who is demon possessed and listen to their lying words and give them the benefit of the doubt as we would a normal moral person?
Not if you have a logical mind. There, I would say that certainly more than half, I would say the majority. Matter of fact, I would normally be superlative and say all, but I'm not going to. Billionaires made a blood contract with the devil in most cases. And they're liars and they're materialists and they're scared of dying and they're scared that there may be a God. And so the question is, do we really want to follow that model? Do we really want to follow the model of a Hollywood star who gets paid tens of millions of dollars to play a character who picks up a gun and kills lots of people and rapes people and so on and so forth, and then later preaches to us the gospel of nonsense, which they're preaching, which is that they are moral when in fact all they do is display immorality in
Right.
their life and in their movies?
We
No,
call
we
that
don't.
virtue signaling. They signal that they believe something, but they don't really believe it.
So these billionaires, look closely at most of them. There are a few who actually had true innovations and they couldn't be weaponized by DARPA and by Highlands Forum and by the globalists and the Department of Defense. And so they may have legitimately become billionaires, yes. But most of them, as we have busted them, every time we look at one of these people, we find that they are completely vile, despicable people who are licentious, who are liars, who have done dirty deals, who've sold their soul to the devil in a blood contract. Now, yourself, your invention, and this is a question, we'll perhaps end on this note. You'd be a trillionaire now if it had gone through properly without the people who came in and took advantage of your inventions. Do you think it would have changed you if you were a trillionaire?
I hope not.
Yeah, you'd be one of the few people, and that's the reason they couldn't deal with you. You weren't willing to sign in blood for the devil's contract, for the contract of Satan, for the contract of materialism. And that's the reason
Well,
that
that
they
doesn't
could.
mean I don't think that uh, uh, if right now, if $1 trillion were put in my lap, would I lose my faith? That would be one way of asking the question. And there, I hope not. And I don't think I would, but you can't predict the future. But by the same token, you have to apply to those resources. The question is, what's God's will for these resources? And what I do know is one of the things that is God's will is that I do right by my shareholders. And so my shareholders made a contract with me when they made an investment, and I'm duty bound to try to meet those commitments that I made with them. And then from the standpoint of what happens with that cash after that, well, the portion that's theirs is then between them and God. Now, the portion that comes to me, it's my requirement to continue to be a good steward of these resources. And the Bible Jesus talked about the parable of the talents. And he recognized that not everybody was given the same set of resources to deal with in their lives. But what he did say is that with the resources you have, you make the most of it. and that is His will. And that doesn't mean we do it in a profligate way, but that we are responsible to be good stewards of what He has given us. So He used the parable of the talents with 1 talent, 5 talents, 10 talents, and He actually criticized the one with 1 talent who went and buried it and didn't do anything with it. And then the one with 10 talents apparently applied it well and increased the value. And that was the good steward. So I think with stewardship relative to human creativity, that's between that is yet to be seen with our technology. I think we're still in the middle ground there, and I do hope that in the end that my shareholders will be made whole, will be made good, and will receive the reward for the risk they took, and that I will be as well. But does that mean I'm going to chase the dollar like these demons are? No, I'm not going to do that.
And I believe everything you just said, and I know that it's true in my heart. Now, for myself, I took the vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience multiple times. And unfortunately, it went into me so deep that when I did raise over $100 million for Waldorf education, I never got a percentage. I did it out of the love of Waldorf education and wanting to help those children and those teachers. Later, I started working for a very big company, and I'd write every year a $54 to $60 million grant, which we would get the money for. At the end of the year, we'd have to give money back. Did I get a percentage of that? No, I didn't. What would modern capitalism say about me? I am stupid. There must be something terribly wrong with me. But I had enough. I had all I needed. I had a happy family. I had a happy life. I didn't need the other. And as a matter of fact, it never even crossed my mind to say, oh, I should get my 5% or my 10% or whatever.
Right.
If I had, I am pretty sure that it would have ruined me. You're a very good person. Had I been given 10% of the money that I've raised for education over my life, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, I have a feeling it would have ruined me because I wasn't used to having that much money. I still, to this point, have access to all kinds of money, but I don't use it. I live a very simple life, and I believe that that's part of the poor will inherit the earth. It isn't the rich will inherit the earth. The rich will dominate the earth, but it is the poor, it is the humble, it is those doing service and actually being, pardon me?
The meek will inherit the earth.
I mean the meek, but the poor of spirit will,
yes.
What's the poor of spirit will, what? What's the beatitude? The poor of spirit will...
Say it every week.
Yeah, I know we both do, but we're slipping both of our minds. But the point is, poor of spirit doesn't mean that you need to live a poor life. The happiest people I've ever known, and that's maybe why I became so convinced that living on the edge of poverty, I've never really lived on the edge of poverty much, but the people that I saw living on the edge of poverty, some of the happiest people you'd ever seen. Beautiful families. They were so grateful and appreciative of everything. And so I do believe that what you've uncovered is the literal blood contracts with the devil that started in Babylon, that to this very day, when you sign a banknote for your house, nobody tells you you're going to pay 3 times the price for your house. That's hidden
Right.
in the documents. That is a old Radhanite Babylonian banking trick. It's a
Right.
Ponzi scheme. It is a scam to steal from you what should be rightfully yours. And with taxes in America and the capitalistic system, it says you can never own anything. You can be destroyed. Right. You can be put in jail for the rest of your life where you'll die because you didn't pay taxes on land that you've paid those taxes every year you ever owned the land. So when is it that you would own anything? So that kind of poverty, if we could get to the point to say that what a person's work is becomes their reality instead of money that sits in a bank that makes money. Rudolf Steiner once said the basis of evil in the economic world is money that makes money and has no association with human labor, human
Right.
work. So that's what we have to basically make as our a sacred connection to the spiritual world, is that what we do, which I call our religion, whatever you do every single day, that is your offering. That is your wealth. That is the wealth that's going to create the mansion in the kingdom that Christ said he is gone to prepare for us.
Amen. I wanted to change the subject before I know we're over, but maybe we can pick this up later. When we were talking the other day and we were talking about demon possession, and you were saying that in this electronic world that we entered into in the mid 1800s, that, that demons actually possess electronic devices. And I can believe that. I can see when you walk down the street and you see everybody's nose buried in their iPhones, you realize something's wrong here because all of the energy is being focused on this screen, and it's just like it's sucking it in. And I think parents see that with their children, how they get hypnotized whenever they're in front of a screen, and they have to limit that. So anyway, you mentioned that, and you said poltergeist was an example of that, and that you actually advised them on that issue. And that Steiner talked about it. So we see there's something wrong with electronic devices, and that you said that demons can enter those devices. Okay, so now roll forward to this. That we're actually seeing something akin to electric circuits being put in our bodies. And I just crazy thought. Start growing in your bodies is that doesn't quite make sense. I mean, it takes a lot more to build something and that actually works than just cells randomly connecting to each other. But if the end result was putting circuits in your body that could be possessed by demons, then I see that could happen now. And what do you say about that in terms of is could the end result of that actually be making people more susceptible to being demon possessed without their will?
Absolutely. Let's first go back to what a subscriber asked. Would you please explain what electricity is? Electricity is a sinkhole of magnetism that pulls angels out of the air and binds them into wiring. Now, that also then includes all radio broadcasting, all electromagnetic frequencies that emanate. So, what are you doing? You're basically trying to kill angels and pull them into these devices. So, if we look at this little device here, first off, the material in it is from underneath the earth. They're metals, minerals, man made materials. And what are they? Through electricity, they have been turned into our slaves. And because of our Luciferic pride, we think we deserve this and we get really upset. But what's it doing? It's sucking us into subterranean realms.
Okay, so when I see a device like this, I see millions of hours of people's ideas that have all been collected together and are now combined and compacted into a very small item. And I am just amazed at the capability of this and always have been. Every time this happens, remember back in the day when you sent an email and it went somewhere on the other side of the world, and you go, whoa, that's
Exactly.
amazing.
And it's the devil who tells you that you're omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent with these devices. You have omniscience because you can look up anything with these, right? It makes you look like you're really smart. You have omnipotence because you can affect other people's lives. You can move your money around. You can do all kinds of evil machinations with these. It makes you look like you're omnipotent.
So you're saying all money moving around is evil? So if you do banking online, that's evil? Is that what you're saying? I don't think it is.
No, I'm not quite saying that, but I am saying that yes, the digital world gives you the illusion of what should be hard coinage that you worked for, and that then you pass on to someone else who did some work, and then you're acknowledging their work. This is now, there's none of that. I order something on Amazon, it comes in an hour to my house. I don't even know how it got there. I don't even know how it works. I don't know how my phone works. And so what am I doing? I'm an ignorant fool who signed a contract with the devil to think that I deserve the power that this device gives me. And I am abnegating the work of the millions of people who had to go into programming these things, creating these things, digging things up from the earth to make these. So yes, these devices, all devices that do work for you are slaves. And who are the slaves that are bound in these? Angels. They fall from our atmosphere, they're bound, and then they are turned into slaves for us. Now,
That's amazing that they're angels. I better be thanking these angels for providing these services.
correct. And then templated reduced graphene oxide quantum dots fall from the sky every day on people in America in chemtrails. All the water of every major city, the pipes are lined with graphene oxide. Almost all packaging now of food has graphene oxide in it. Any processed food has graphene oxide in it. So, yes, templated graphene oxide merging with PEG, polyethylene glycol, create what templated, they're templated.
When you
So
say templated, what do you mean?
that
I
means
mean they're in some sort of circuit.
they
Is that
have
what you
been
meant?
programmed to collect other particles like themselves and build what has been programmed into the templated graphene oxide, whether it be in sheets, whether it be in dots, whether it be in any form of graphene oxide. So we now know that, of
You
course,
mean, sorry, but I've heard you say templated before, but I'm not sure what you mean. So it's pre-programmed, not programmed so much as its very nature to find other similar matter, and then organize itself either in a triangle or a circle or a sphere or some sort of many-sided octagon, uh, and that's
yes,
what it does.
it is pre-programmed. And they've demonstrated that if they get a chance, they will create an antenna to receive and broadcast. And we see this, we see it in the circuits being created because graphene oxide is considered in every single scientific investigation I've seen. And I looked at 54 of them the last time I studied this. Can't find any single scientific study that says anything other than all graphene oxide is toxic to all cells in the human body. But
Wow.
it's still used all over the place. And when you add polyethylene glycol, that turns a plastic into an electrical conducting material. So when you put graphene oxide and PEG together, it joins together, usually in the bloodstream where there's a flow and there's warmth, and then 5G and 4G also, and also pulsating electromagnetic frequencies cause them to join together and self-construct and self-create circuits in the body. Now, these circuits in the body tend to look like blood clots. But basically, Rudolf Steiner said that these machines, these demons in the machines, and these are machines, they would try to create another being inside of you.
Hmm.
But that being will make you into either an automaton who has so much of this stuff in their system that it clogs up everything. It goes through the blood-brain barrier to your brain. It goes to your heart. It goes to your genitalia. It goes to your liver. It goes to your pancreas. And it will kill you in the process of creating a secondary cyborg inside of you, an automaton.
So that's the thing I think that we see these demons taking over our banking, but now it sounds like they've taken it another step and they're actually in the process of creating a mechanism in our bodies where they can take over our bodies even without us agreeing.
It's Richard C. Walker's patent on the aggressive remote control of all sentient beings. That even includes trees and animals. It includes
Which,
every
by the way,
device.
it looks like Richard C. Walker was another name for James P. Chandler III.
Exactly. Who you had the pleasure of meeting that devil personally. But he had a nice forked tongue. The devil always is dressed in beautiful clothes. His pockets are lined with gold. He shows up in a golden carriage drawn by four white stallions in the fairy
He
tales.
can be charming.
and he can give you a deal that you cannot refuse, and he expects you to sign in blood. So yes, a Mark Zuckerberg has signed in blood. He signed his soul away. So when he was talking about the God of creation, it was so hollow that no one
or
could
whatever. So
possibly. He,
whatever. Yeah, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Oh
It's
man,
it's,
I've
it's
read so many
yeah.
of his, so much of his testimony. It's so consistent with this lion
Well, Nikola Tesla
person.
said his inventions were to create humans that would become automatons and would be controlled by radio frequencies from a distance. He says that. He describes it in great detail. I did a report. You can go to Aim for Truth and just simply search Nikola Tesla and look at the intelligence report on him. People want to make him into a saint when in fact he was demon possessed of the worst kind. He was Ahriman's lieutenant. And what did he want to do? He wanted to get rid of all the frivolousness of human beings, just like Chat GPT tells us, just like Deep State, Deep Mind, the first supposed artificial intelligent computer. When asked the question, Deep Mind said, keep humans in the human zoo.
Well,
When
I don't share that. I find other people infinitely more interesting.
exactly. So these machines are nothing more than a mechanism for Babylonian demonic control of people through blood contracts, through economic slavery, through merchandising with a sword, through literally human trafficking and slavery, pedophilia, grotesque abomination of desolations, again
Okay.
and again and again. And now it is led by godless science, godless psychiatry, godless psychologists who literally want to tell you about your soul, but they don't know that the spirit creates the soul. And then in most cases, all they can really tell you about is your physical body. And even then, only the vices that control it, not the virtues.
Yeah, and we've got to look to the City of London for this demon, and that is the source here. So all of our legislators and congressmen and public officials need to stop looking at CIA, FBI, NSA. No, they're not running this. This is being run out of the City of London. Look
John
at
Maynard Keynes of
Kinetic,
the
look at Serco,
mhm,
look at the Pilgrim Society.
the London School of Economics and John Maynard Keynes at Bretton Woods, before United Nations was created, said that there has to be one world currency. He called it Banco because the original fake Jews in Venice were called the Banco family, and so the irony wasn't wasted on me. And basically, he was stopped, and he was stopped by some communists. He was stopped by a man named White. I think his name was Dexter White,
Dexter White. Yeah,
and he was a
Harry
communist. And he
Dexter White.
says, no, this is pure communism and we want to do it our way. We're not going to do it the British economic communist way. And
Right.
so what do we have now? Central bank digital currencies popping up in every single nation. And who controls that? The British, through the Bank for International Settlement and through the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank. And these are basically British crown agencies that have our economic slavery in mind. That is their point. And they don't even need you to sign in blood anymore. Every time you use this phone and you're going to spend money with your phone, and my children, when they go to pay, sometimes they used to just take their phones and touch their phones to each other and the money was transferred. Now it's going to be what? Your palm. And so on your wrist, 666, on your forehead, 666. That means 666. The demons and the machines, the materialistic machines have taken over your mind. They've taken over your heart, and they have absolutely taken over our will. They've made us into slothful, lustful aggrandizement. All we're interested in is our own benefit right now in this material world, which then blinds us. The devil comes out and does it overtly, but it blinds us to the spirit. And this is the trick of the devil. It used to be the devil had a rule: never show himself, right? That's the
Right.
reason in my day there were only 10 exorcists in the whole world.
Yeah, that's why haven't we
Nowadays,
seen these before now?
pardon me,
Why haven't we seen these demons before now?
it just becomes so pronounced. That's all. They've always been there for those who could see them. I mean, look, it goes back to 4,000 years ago. You have demonstrated that. And they even tried to throw away the cuneiform tablets, which were a deal with the devil signed in blood. Okay, right. They were covering their tracks. These are the best obfuscators in the whole world. These are the best subliminal programmers. These are the best infiltrators. They're the best people in the world to move in and take over very quietly. It's just like the British monarchy. Oh, we're titular heads. We're not the head of a religion. We're not the head of banking in England. We're not the head of the evil. We were never involved in any wars. The monarchy of Europe was nothing but a continuation of ruthless tribal wars.
We've seen that these banks have to have wars. That's their stock in trade, and they're carrying it on today. So Douglas, thanks for getting into some of these details, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Well, I look forward to thanking Tyla, our producer, who is in the unseen world. In most of the cases, she lets us do the talking, but you and I both know who the boss is, and we have to thank her because she's the person who has motivated me to speak about these things. I would have never, ever spoken about these things.
No, you're really helping a lot of people to understand the spiritual attack and this issue with demons, because most of us were so materialistic in our past. We needed to hear what you have to say.
I only do it because my own personal angel, my wife, Tyla, makes sure that she's going to get me on record saying the things that I complain about and bitch about at home. And then she says, well, the rest of the world needs to hear this. And so she's the one who also put me on to you. Yes. And she's also the one who is our producer, our director, our philanthropist, the person who really has the plan. She's our strategist. She is the genius of the CAT movement.
Amen.
And she's the genius of the Aim for Truth movement and the Anonymous Patriots and all the different things and the many different forms that she's manifested. So behind every good man, there's a good woman, they used to say. But I say with us, behind every two good men, there's a good woman. Mm-hmm. So thank you, Tyla. And thank you for the spiritual world for keeping me alive along with Tyla's efforts so that I can finally speak these things out and not be afraid and not brag that I'm a whistleblower because I was in the NSA, so therefore I know everything. No, I only know my own areas. And you know that. I oftentimes display my ignorance profusely. But when it comes down to religion, comparative religions, when it comes down to these kind of things, and some of the research that we've been doing, that I stand on our research. I don't just stand on the fact that I think I'm a know-it-all like some of these.
Douglas, come on. You are the most interesting man in the world.
Yeah, but you're the Highlander. You can be interesting, but it doesn't mean someone will chop your head off. So we will continue this discussion, and if you want to pick it up with graphene oxide and polyethylene glycol next time, I'm happy to do that because that's one of the greatest evils of our time. Okay. So thank you so much, and thank you for your good-heartedness. And I believe that if you were a trillionaire, it wouldn't change your spirituality.
Have a good Holy Week. This is my Holy Week.
Exactly. So, today is Good Friday, which I used to call Bad Friday. I never understood why they call it good. And remember that Christ's death on the cross, he went into the subterranean realms where all the devils live. And what happened every time a devil came near Christ? They screamed and yelled, "You are the Christ. You are the Son of God." They were the first witnesses of his divinity. And now he has entered into those realms. He's conquered those realms. And we actually have nothing to fear from these things. It is part of the divine plan.
Amen.